And hi everyone. Welcome to Thoughts for Change Makers, LinkedIn Live, where we challenge the status quo, elevate performance, and foster exponential growth. Today, let me introduce my guest, Winitha Bonney. She is a leading global expert in helping purpose-driven brands build inclusive cultures. She is also Australia's first and foremost thought leader in leadership for women and people of color. And more admirable, in 2021, she was awarded an Order of Australia medal for her extensive work in inclusion. So thank you, Winitha, for being with us today. So I usually like to ask one quick question on performance to all my guests to start with. So I'm curious, what is your definition of high performance for individual as a person? What does it mean for you?
I think for me, it's someone that is always pushing the boundaries around their potential. I do believe that the human capacity is limitless. And I know that I myself am always pushing that boundary of actually what is possible and what is possible for myself, my practice, my life, the communities of which I serve. It's pushing the boundaries of what is possible. So for me, that's what high performance is. And that's my definition. So it doesn't necessarily have to be everyone else's, but that's
definitely. And that's what I love each time, to have a guest that is bringing a new perspective. Because each time you would ask someone what is the definition of success, of happiness, you will get different definition, and same for performance. Now, I would love to learn a bit more, and I'm sure like people joining us as well, like, again, it's about definition, but I like to set the context for people before moving forward. So what does it mean for you to inclusive leadership? What is it?
So an inclusive leader is someone that first and foremostly role models inclusive behaviors and communication in the workplace. So we know that our team members look to our leaders to almost give them permission on how to show up at work. And, we're interesting human beings. So even though we are grown human beings, we tend to mimic the behavior of those around us as well. And particularly in the context of the workplace, we tend to mimic the behavior of our leaders as well. And we tend to take on their behaviors. And that's when you'll start to see a culture emerge, because particularly when you've got people that work in an organization, they've learned how to manage and how to lead from the person that has managed them or led them. They've also learned how not to lead and how not to manage. So for me, that's the context of leadership and how leadership evolves and grows in the workplace. And when we add an inclusion layer to that, it's really coming from the perspective of consciousness. So consciousness around one's behaviors and communication, and externally how that impacts other people in terms of whether it helps them or whether it causes harm or hurt to individuals as well. And when we talk about inclusion, we're particularly looking at what we call historically and socially marginalized and excluded groups. So these are groups and communities in our world, in our society, that have been discriminated and deliberately excluded because of their identity, who they are. And so an inclusive leader is someone that actively looks at their behavior and their communication and how that shows up for those communities, whether it makes them feel included, whether it makes them feel like their voice is heard and valued, whether they feel safe as well. And then I guess the next layer to that is an inclusive leader is someone who's actively involved in the business of cultivating inclusion in their team culture or in the business culture as well. The third layer is an inclusive leader is someone that is looking at the business model and maybe even the strategy behind the business and integrates inclusion into that business model as well. So, for example, for a product-based business, this could look like products that are, for example, with particular physical products, are they accessible to people who have physical disabilities? In terms of software, do they discriminate against Black folk, against Indigenous folk, and people of color? So there's different layers to inclusive leadership, but an inclusive leader is someone that is actively engaged in all three. It starts with themselves, creating a culture of inclusion, and then extends into the business model.
I love it. Like, it's not only about your leadership style, but it's having ripple effect to the business as well. I love it. And usually when you come into an organization or when people are asking you some question, is there things that are still like kind of not very well perceived, or what are the blockages that maybe is happening in those conversations?
Well, I think the primary blockage is fear. Fear stems from a place of, I'm going to call it ego. And by ego, I don't mean a fake sense of self-importance. I mean ego around one's identity and feeling a sense of shame and guilt around that identity as well. So a lot of the times, regardless of whether we call what we say in inclusion talk, call people in. So, I'm not too sure about what you said, or that comment that that person made to you, like they were right, and giving feedback from a place of, actual self, belief in that person and their ability to change. That's calling in. Calling out is when someone has engaged in behavior that is absolutely harmful, and they need to be, called out, and immediate action needs to be taken. And so regardless of whether it's calling in or calling out, the number one blockage I feel is that people aren't receptive to that feedback, whether it's presented as from a place of holding that person accountable to being the highest level of integrity of that person, being the best potential, highest potential, the best version of themselves. And then even if it's calling out, it's contributing towards that person behaving and existing in the world as a better version of themselves. But we tend to perceive that as a negative, and that is usually stemmed in our own trauma around shame and guilt. So I believe that's because the first 8 years of our life, which is where our personality is formed, we have been told we're a good person or a good child or a bad child. When we go into the school education system, this idea of right and wrong, and therefore being a smart person or not a smart person, or a person who gets the answer right to a maths question, or someone that gets it wrong, that integrates into our personality. And I think there's a lot of shame there. And I think we all have our own shame. It could be shame around our identity. It could be shame around some other sort of trauma that we've experienced. And so the number one block to inclusion is people being fearful of change, because that change is linked directly to their identity. It's not to some external business KPI. It's linked directly to their capability, to their sense of identity.
Yeah.
And it triggers them. There's that sense of shame and guilt of, I'm a bad person. And so people push against that, because no one wants to feel like they're a racist. No one wants to feel like they're sexist. No one wants to feel like they are whatever label that is. No one wants to feel like they are a bad person. And so that's why we push up against change, and maybe push up against inclusion efforts altogether.
Okay. So that's very profound what you just mentioned. I'm curious, if everyone is joining us live, please make sure to say hi, and as well to share your thoughts or questions, reflection on what we are talking about. So yeah, it's I wouldn't had a clue that in fact you would link that to maybe trauma and fear, but fear, yes, and then trauma. So knowing that,
Yeah.
what are the techniques so far that you've been able to leverage, or you've seen that because it seems like you're it's a discussion with like on a block. It doesn't seem like it's a we are entering a collaboration and negotiation. It seems like it's more like a, you see what I mean, like with this one. Yeah, it seems like there is a lot of resistance, and it's a strong resistance. So what are the ways to maybe go from this resistance to, okay, let's look together within in the same direction and move forward? Either.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we can't change people if they don't choose to change.
Okay, yeah,
We
agree with that.
can't change people's mindsets. Also, trauma is not something that you can generally physically see. So in terms of psychological trauma, that's something that we can't physically identify in someone. And if that person hasn't done a level of their own healing work on that trauma, then regardless of what tool or technique that you use, you're not going to get cut through to that person. You're not going to have traction with that person and aspire them, motivate them, encourage them, empower them to, to create change, because actually what they need to do is with that stuff first. The way that I generally approach it is my approach is not one that is grounded in shame or guilt or fear. It is very aspirational. It's all about possibility, potentiality, and all about big picture in the future. So I take inclusion from a very aspirational sense. And it's all about helping that individual actually be a much more better and effective leader, like actually all around. Because this is like the hardest stuff to do. And this is the hardest area of leadership that requires work on oneself. And it's the area that also has the most resistance and pushback. And I know that when leaders really step into that and really dive into that, that fundamentally transform every area of their leadership. And they actually then start to realize and understand that leadership is a practice and something that needs to be evolving and grow. Because I think a lot of people, and this is not aimed at anyone specific, in my experience working with different organizations, I think there are a lot of people that have leadership titles. Are they acting in the capacity of a leader? I don't think so. What I actually see them doing is a lot of, and I say this because I'm not just an inclusion, I have a business background and I have an absolutely love of business and have studied business since I was 15. So I'm not just saying this as someone who's just done social justice work and human rights work and has absolutely no idea about the business of leading an organization. And what I have seen in a lot of organizations is people are actually doing BAUs, just keeping the lights on, right?
Sorry?
Just keeping the lights on, business as usual activity.
Oh, okay.
So just the day-to-day activity, keeping the lights on, going through their days, their weeks, their months monotonously, and yes, reaching targets and performance criteria, and it's nothing that is around like really evolving and growing the business in a really dynamic and new way. And so I know that if leaders can really focus on this area of themselves, that requires and actually demands from people to evolve. And that is a skill set, because it requires not just resilience, it requires anti-fragility. And anti-fragility is the number one skill that's needed in particularly for innovation. So if inclusion work is some of the best work that leaders can actually engage in, and that will actually help them and support them to be an incredible leader and to gain results all around, not just around inclusion.
Thank you. And just pausing to see if anyone wants to share and ask any questions, share their thoughts on that. Okay, so you talked about anti-fragility. It's funny because we had also someone that talked about anti-fragility, and in fact this week I was in a conference and someone also mentioned anti-fragility, and so I see a trend in anti-fragility. So everyone watching, get on anti-fragility, because it seems there is something ongoing with that over resilience. So now, in this inclusive leadership journey, what is the middle journey. So I understand the beginning of the journey, and then the middle journey, and then the end of the journey of this transformation work that either individual organization can go towards. So, and I really like this call in, call out. Is there anything else that is also happening along this transformation journey that you are seeing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of things that I teach leaders. One of them is to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. So a lot of the times we listen to respond. We're already thinking about, what am I going to say? And particularly when we're called in or called out, we go into panic mode and meltdown because instantly that shame part of our brain, lights up. And we're not thinking about, hey, can I understand the other person's perspective? We're actually thinking about, how am I going to respond? And that's all about you and yourself and your feelings and your ego. When inclusion is actually all about the other person and their feelings and their emotions. And so one of the things that we can do in the middle is take more time out to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. So one of the ways that you can listen to understand is, like a coaching technique, which is to actually clarify and repeat back what that person has said. So Lizon, what I heard you say is X, Y, Z. Did I get that right? Is that clear? And then to actually sit and pause and sit with it. And it's okay for there to be an awkward silence as well. And I think too many times leaders feel like, I'm a leader, I need to lead, I need to have the answer to everything. And you don't have the answer to everything. And I've seen a lot of leaders in my short space of my time that I've been alive, being hired and promoted into leadership skills, not because they have leadership skills, which is people skills. It's because of their ability to get, business results. So they're hired based on technical skills. And so for a lot of people, it's about learning how to communicate, learning how to engage with people. I mean, we struggle with this even in our, relationships, personal relationships, and business. We spend 70% of our life at work engaged with our team members. And so we do. We're not taught this at school. We do need to learn how to engage with people. And in terms of inclusion, there's so much nuance and so much complexity to it that we're not going to understand straight away. So if someone was to say what you said was potentially racist, and you might struggle to understand that, most people's default would be like, oh, I didn't mean that. I didn't say that. What I meant was, rather than, okay, what I heard you saying is that blah, blah, blah. And you feel that what I said was racist. And then asking them a question around, maybe there's a thread in there that you can pull, or the other response might be, after you sit and pause on it and seek to understand first, then you might respond and say, okay, so next time I will rephrase this sentence as blah, 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 blah. How does that sound? And committing to take the action, because what that person is asking of you in that moment is to take action, is to change. And most times people just put up a wall and become super defensive, go into a shame spiral, a guilt spiral, and don't lean into that invitation to grow and to change. So we talk a lot about growth mindset. Inclusion is one of the most powerful tools and areas that you can leverage, not utilize, leverage to gain a growth mindset, because it will challenge you. Like, even though I'm a inclusion expert who is a woman of color, I have people pulling me up on things all the time. If anything, they are more demanding of me in terms of how I show up and the words and the language that I use, that they absolutely need to be inclusive 100% of the time. And absolutely, I've recognized those patterns in myself of having a bit of a meltdown, a bit of a shame spiral, and I can choose to pause. And I can choose to sit and reflect on it, to understand it truly from their perspective. The other thing in terms of the middle ground is handling conversations where individuals have different beliefs. So one of the other things that I teach is that we can hold belief and acceptance in both hands. So Lizon, you may have a totally different belief than me, and I can choose to accept your belief, and you can also choose to accept mine.
Mm.
So unity is created not just by us being aligned in our beliefs. Unity can also be created by us coexisting harmoniously and sharing different beliefs. And we know this, with religion. Like, yes, religion has caused a lot of tension and war and pain and trauma and heartache. And what we know of religion is there are many religions and faiths with multiple faiths and multiple beliefs. And we know that people, I have friends that have different beliefs, totally different beliefs, and can coexist in a relationship. This idea that we need to be sharing the same beliefs is something that, I know that I am very open to challenging within myself. And so one of the things that we can encourage our team members to do is, can we open ourselves enough to hold both beliefs lightly in each other's hands? The other thing is agreeing to disagree. So a lot of the times we have different ways that we communicate. We have different ways that we disagree. I know that for a lot of, Black, Indigenous, women of color, they are labeled as passive aggressive. They are labeled as too direct. They are labeled as assertive in the way that they communicate. And we all communicate differently. If we all communicate the same way, it would be a completely boring world. And so when you have a team of people that all have different lived experiences, I think one of the first things that needs to happen in order to create a safe and inclusive environment is that we have a conversation about what are the terms of disagreement look like? What does healthy disagreement look like? Because a lot of the times when there's disagreement in the workplace, there are certain groups of people, again, historically and socially marginalized and excluded individuals and groups whose voices aren't heard because the terms of disagreement does not include how they disagree in the workplace as well. All of this work is mindset as well. And I think it all starts in terms of looking at the middle and what happens in the middle. If you do not have a really high level of emotional intelligence and awareness, if you are not willing to feel your own pain and suffering, how can you possibly relate or connect or understand the pain and suffering of other people as well? And so that's where I think a lot of the pushback happens. And that's where we are unable to understand other people's pain and suffering because we are disconnected from our own pain and suffering as well. We may able to intellectualize it, we may be able to understand it, but we may not truly be able to understand it differently.
So someone share with us a situation.
Yeah, we absolutely do communicate. I mean, even for me, I've been living in Australia since I was, a very young age. And there are things that people say that I'm just like, James, who's James? And they're like, it's Andrew. I was like, how did you get James from Andrew? I remember, that was a true story. That was in a workplace. People shorten names here in Australia as well. And we need to be conscious. And even for me, like in inclusion, there's a lot of acronyms. I used one just today, like BAU. And, forgetting that not everyone understands what BAU means, being business as usual. So that's something for us to be aware of. So even in that moment when you interrupted me, Lizanne, like straight away in that moment, I caught myself, right? But there was an awareness there enabled for me to caught myself. Because when whatever you said that you said, I was just like, oh, hang on. Not everyone understands acronyms. I didn't explain the acronym. Now, I'm not going to a shame spiral. I'm not going to a meltdown of like, I'm a bad person. I'm the inclusion, not exclusion, inclusion expert. How dare you? I could be like, okay, I noticed it. Okay, I need to be more mindful.
And do you also have this more insights regarding the different generation? Is it part of inclusion? Because I do have a lot of leaders I'm talking with, and they say it's hard for them to work with different generations in the workplace. Someone had a bit of humor. BAU. Boring
Oh,
as usual.
I love that. I'm gonna steal that. Thank you.
Me too, love it.
Boring as usual. That is fantastic. Oh my God, I'm gonna so use that. It is boring. Yeah. Yeah, I think also, I see just generally out in the world, a lot of people existing with just a real lack of consciousness and awareness. So I was
Mm,
sharing with a mentor today earlier that because I'm so hyper aware and the inclusion work has made me even more hyper aware.
mhm,
When I walk my dog Bubbles, I hear sound bites. So when people are having a conversation on the phone or with
mhm,
their person that they're walking with, I grab bits of conversation and it just
mhm,
like jumps into my brain, And even for example, this morning I heard the conversation from behind me, it passed, and then I saw it what seemed to be as physically presented as a parent with their two grown children talking
mhm,
about a wedding, and this person, how the wedding was uncomfortable, and that's made my brain start ticking. And I think for a lot of the times, what I've realized is that we're so stuck in our own heads
mm,
and the dialogue in our own minds, and we're so stuck up here that we're not able to see what's out there because it's safe in here.
mm. Because
Safe,
we create safety.
yeah, safe, comfortable.
Yeah.
We're certain to whatever degree of what happens in here. We can, generally um, able to have some foresight about our thinking processes and things like that.
Mm,
But when it comes to other individuals, that is a responsibility, right? And I think a lot of
mm,
people, um, it's easier to push the responsibility on someone else.
mm. So I think it's a good advice and a good reminder for everyone watching. It's about to create this empathy map about all those situations we go through, and maybe wonder what this person is seeing in this situation. What is this person feeling in this situation? And not only about us, but then about the other person. What are they seeing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking in this situation? And
Mm,
definitely can happen as well in the work life or in your personal life, to have a bit more of an empathy map, and to assess quickly that maybe how you experience this situation might have been experienced very differently from the other party.
yeah, that's actually one of the activities that I use in my inclusive leadership training to help people get out of their own minds and their own beliefs and their own assumptions.
Mm,
And sometimes that means that they actually don't fill out the map. And sometimes that's a result that needs to happen for them to realize that actually these are all my own assumptions and beliefs, and I actually don't know. And the
mm,
first step is actually finding out.
mm, yeah.
Mm.
And how would you say about finding out? How would you help people to say, okay, if they are really not aware, like what would be the advice you would give?
Yeah, so I think storytelling is really powerful. So with a lot of clients that I work with, I work very intimately with the L&D, like the learning and development team or the training
Mhm,
team or education team,
mhm,
and look at what they've got planned and work with them to either bring people into the business to share their own stories,
mhm,
and or we take them out of the business, to take them physically out of the building and put
mhm,
them amongst community to hear the stories of
mhm,
community and also to be in community.
mm,
Um, so, for example, there is a difference between a trans person coming into your business sharing their story
mhm,
and you being in a room full of trans people talking about their strength, their hope, their resilience, as well as their pain and their suffering and their challenges. And there's
mm.
something that's very dynamic that you can't put a process around
Okay.
that has people leaving like something happened, something changed with me, but I don't know what it is. And that's
Mhm,
the experience that they needed. So I'm a really big believer in I call them container experiences or immersive experiences, and putting yourself in amongst a container of which there is an experience happening around you can fundamentally change your wiring, your how you think, how you believe, in a much more faster way than trying to think your way through something. The other process is getting people to actually do the work. So there is the think, feel, do model, which is if I think more unbiased thoughts, I will feel more unbiased, and I will do more behaviors or do more actions that are unbiased. And the research shows that is false. And actually what helps to support us to rapidly more change our behaviors and to really ground and wire those new beliefs and those new ways of thinking is actually to start with the behavior first. So if we engage in the behavior, we see the result of that behavior, that will produce an emotion. And that emotion is so powerful in changing the way that we think. And I think for a long time, we've been led to believe that we need to start our way with thinking first. And you can't think your way out of thinking, like you'll just go around in mental loops. The most powerful way to change the way that you think is through a very strong emotional response. And so that's why I'm a big believer in storytelling and people coming into a business and sharing their story. A real sense of vulnerability and directness as well. And taking people out of the business and putting them in the community, having them attend protests and rallies. Get yourself in the middle, be in an immersive experience, and you'll get it a lot faster.
I'm jumping with another question from someone live. So I'm sharing it now.
I don't think her complaint is reasonable because there are many countries where, people don't understand historical context. They only see what is immediately in front of them right then and there. Secondly, it doesn't cost you anything. If people are there speaking their traditional language and that helps them feel included, that helps them feel like a sense of like family, a sense of home, a deeper sense of connection, great, go for it, right? And if that person is feeling, so what I'm kind of hearing is that they're feeling maybe at a deep level, maybe a sense of, well, they might label it as, I don't know, discrimination, but I think at a deep level, it's about feeling not included themselves. Then actually they need to think about it from the perspective of that group of people and what their experiences might be as well. I have friends from all over the world. And I also grew up with, my best friend of 18 years was Croatian. And I would be here in her house pretty much every weekend, and the whole family would speak Croatian, knowing that I was there and I did not understand Croatian. And sometimes, I would feel a bit left out. And then I realized that this is part of their identity and their culture. And that's a really important part of identity. And I don't need to understand. I can sit there and I can create space and I can maybe even learn another language myself by picking up, little bits and pieces and actually making an effort myself as well. So I don't think my own professional and personal opinion is I don't think it is a reasonable complaint. I think if they were in a meeting and, for example, Lizanne, if we were from the same culture And I was, we're having a group conversation about a business item, and I was to then speak to you in French, then that's something that I would be a bit concerned about, because I would think, oh, what is Winitha saying to the Luzon group setting? Whereas if it's a collective that are coming together to speak, and it's more about friendship and companionship and having a sense of home. So that's one area. And I think the biggest one is, for a lot of people, this is where historical context is really important. The first thing that has been removed is language. So when we look at colonialism, the first thing that has been removed is people practicing their culture. So cultural rituals, dress, in terms of physical attire, rituals and cultural practices, and then language. And language has been stripped. And if people speak their language, they've been punished in the most vile, horrendous ways. So people speaking their language is, I think, really important and part of that healing as well. Because a lot of people come from historical communities where language and speaking one's language has been banned. And there are a lot of communities, also a lot of Indigenous communities, that have lost language because of colonialization as well. So understanding historically the context of culture and discrimination and exclusion, I think, is really important to help bring understanding. So inclusion is not about you and what you think and feel. Inclusion is actually about other people. Again, listening to understand rather than respond. Okay, I love this. Listen to understand, not listen to respond. And Australian slang or humor is not easily understood by people who are from other cultures. Think, feel model is fascinating. More of this is needed in the boardroom as much as in the workplace. Absolutely.
I think, thank you, Caroline. You're making picking those gold nuggets that have been exchanged so far. Let's talk about the boardroom. Like I remember, like, you've been working a bit with some boardroom, and so, like, if anyone working in a boardroom watching now, what piece of insights would you like to share with them? Because in fact, in my LinkedIn, my network, I know has this type of people, so they might be watching us. So
So are you talking about people that are wanting to sit on a board, or people?
Oh no, they are already sitting
in a board?
Yeah.
Okay. So most boards don't even care about inclusion, first of all, in my experience. It's seen as something that we have to do. It's looked at from the context of risk and being compliant, rather than, and one of the sayings that I have with inclusion is that inclusion is an opportunity, a value add, not a problem to be solved. And a lot of boards look at it from the context of a problem. And that is the exact root of it, that communities have been looked at as a problem. Trans folk, non-binary folk, gender fluid, gender non-conforming folk, Black folk, Indigenous folk, people that are living with disabilities, all been looked at as a problem in the community. And it's very ironic that inclusion is then looked at from a business angle as a problem. So the work actually mimics, it's a very strange dynamic, but the work often mimics. If you look at inclusion work as an organism, almost like a human being, the work experiences the same realities of which the communities it is aimed to support and to serve. So inclusion is often siloed. Inclusion is looked at as a problem to be solved. Inclusion is looked at as a burden. Inclusion is looked at, well, let's just do the bare minimum and not leverage the full potential of this. And some organizations don't even look at inclusion at all. And that's almost like mimicking exclusionary behavior. So I think boards need to look at it from that angle and totally flip all of those dynamics and see inclusion as how it can be integrated into a business model or into a brand DNA. So where inclusion is not just part of our business, it's actually how we do business. It's integrated into every part of the business model. It's how we think, it's the lens of which how we view the world as well. And I think that's a greater opportunity and responsibility for board members. The other problem that we have with boards is there's no representation. So, and that's I think where a lot of boards actually need to start first.
Yeah, on my side, I talk about cognitive diversity, having different thought process, different perspective. Because if all the board members, they have the same thinking process, the same decision-making process, they will be oblivious of some blind spots because they will be not aware. And so having some cognitive diversity within the board would allow them to be more, I guess, inclusive in their decision-making process as well.
That's where you need to have first a conversation on how to disagree. Because when you have cognitive diversity and you have people with fundamentally different ways of processing, generating ideas, processing information, communicating information, you're going to have conflict. So
definitely,
absolutely, have diversity, and what you're going to have is what I call a leaky recruitment pipeline, which is you bring people in, but they end up leaving. And why do they end up leaving? Because of that friction. So it's about understanding, again, acceptance and belief. What are the terms of how we interact with each other? Is that truly inclusive in terms of all the different styles of communicating and looking at things differently? And let's look at all the ways that we disagree, and let's create a set of principles of how we collectively as a group are going to disagree. We've got here a comment, spot on. I tend to look at being different as an opportunity and not a problem at all. Some boards or organizations worry too much about fit. So how can you align inclusion there? So we often look at culture fit, and it's not about culture fit. Another thought leader, this is their work, not my own, talks about culture add, and I love that. So it's not about fit. It's actually around, because of our lived experience, because, you, Lizanne, you have different lived experience. Dr. Caroline, you have different lived experience. I have different experience. When we bring all of that to the table, we're adding to the culture. We're adding to the dynamic. We're adding to looking at the business in a completely different ways and generating new ideas and opportunities. We're adding. Whereas when you're seeking to fit in, well, how boring is that, isn't it?
And that, in terms of, with my view on performance, it's poor performance as an outcome, as an output. If you try to fit it too much, ultimately, it's leading to poor performance.
Yeah. I also feel that this is also why a lot of people experience emotional burnout and overwhelm, because we are sacrificing our identity for acceptance. You and I have had these conversations, right? Like, if I change the way that I talk or behave or act or speak, maybe life will be a little bit more easier for me. Maybe I can get some traction in my career. Maybe I can move ahead. What we're essentially doing is sacrificing our identity for acceptance. And what I've experienced in my own life and also coaching people is that then leads to poor mental health, because we're sacrificing the most important part of our life, which is our identity and who we are, to who? And absolutely, we want to forge forward in our careers. Absolutely, we deserve opportunities, and we become enablers to the problem every time we do that as well. So when we give ourselves permission to show up as ourselves and give ourselves permission to show up and communicate and speak and dress and act and behave, Yes, there will be some resistance because people will feel threatened by that. Yes, there are people that may push up and resist or create obstacles because they think, how dare you? You must fit in. And the greater, thing is that we give permission for others to also do the same. And for me, that is what a revolution looks like.
And that's what we should focus on.
Yeah. So by giving ourselves permission to show up as us in the world, despite hardship and challenges, I think that is the greatest contribution to this planet, because that's what the world needs. And I think the reason why the world is in so much pain and suffering is because of expectations and expectations of conformity. And rather than creating space for difference.
And I'm giving space for people to go through what you just mentioned. And adding space to see if more people are willing to share their thoughts, questions. Because I believe, like, I'm not the only one here to ask a question, that you're all invited to ask questions as well. So, and I love it because it's really important for, the community that I'm building with this for change makers, for people that are willing to dare thinking differently, doing things differently, and shift maybe their world for the better. So I really like all your insights. And while, if more people are chatting with us, what else? I'm just gonna open it. What else should we know about inclusive leadership? And I'm also mindful that you've been with us for some time, but I would love to hear more, because I can see the knowledge, the wisdom you have, and I would love to hear more from you. So I'm not sure what question to ask, but is there anything else that you feel that we should talk about?
Me?
Yes.
Okay. This might seem a little bit controversial, but it builds on what I was talking about at the beginning, and that is that we all need to take care of our stuff. We've all got stuff, we're carrying around stuff, and some of us like to hoard our stuff. And I believe the reason why we have toxic cultures is because hurt people hurt people. And even because I work primarily with leadership teams, and there are things that are said to me and behaviors that I see. And when I start to, again, listening to understand and seeking to understand first, and dive into that person and have a bit of a yarn, a bit of a chat with them, and learn more about their story, like their story as like their personal story, then I'm like, that's why they're behaving like that. So we know that, trauma lives in the nervous system, the brain and the body are connected. I know that a lot of us, tend to operate from up here. And I think a lot of us like to think that we have emotional intelligence, and we don't. And so truth, right? Truth. And so, like, for me, my journey is a journey of constant consciousness and building that conscious awareness over the experiences of other people, and trying to understand their perspectives and their beliefs and why they think like that, rather than telling them, oh, that thinking is wrong and you're wrong. Like, if anyone expects that of someone, people generally expect that of DEI experts, that they would jump into a conversation and say that thinking is wrong. And what I like to do first is actually seek to understand and kind of dive in a bit deeper and understand where is that potentially coming from. Because I think a lot of reason why we kind of hold on to our beliefs is because they feel safe. And we haven't really tapped into that deep part of our brain, our unconscious brain, which is where a lot of our thinking and our belief systems are stored, of which we operate from there as well. We operate very much from a surface level. So unless we have the ability to develop a consciousness and awareness about ourselves, which is absolutely the number one tool needed for leaders in terms of leading inclusion and role modeling that behavior, then how can we possibly have awareness and understanding over other people as well? So if you want to put a label around it, it's probably emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
And I don't see enough leaders doing that work. They come in, they
It's
punch
coming.
me out. Yeah.
Sorry,
They do.
but I can see more and more demand within the corporate with more
Mhm.
training in emotional intelligence. So it is rising. So it's a good news. So
Yeah.
it's in fact both critical thinking and decision making, which
Mhm.
I'm happy about, and as well emotional intelligence, which also is great, because true, leadership is about, a lot about awareness about yourself and as well others, especially with the rise of AI and technology, and the rise as well. There is another trend, which is loneliness. More and more people feel lonely. So sorry. Yes, I did interrupt you, but because I see that as well in my work. So I just wanted to share that with
Yeah.
everyone, that yes, like organizations are getting more onto emotional intelligence.
Mm. And people need, I don't know if emotional, so I think it's a piece that comes before emotional intelligence. I think it's agency. Because if organizations, so this may seem a bit controversial to some people, but I think we become enablers to the problem. So if I, as a head of people and cultural learning and development or education, say, okay, we're going to focus on all these things, and absolutely we do need to focus on those things, but I think the most important part is we need to develop people's agency over doing this work themselves, rather than because what happens is people learn it at work and then that's it, rather than developing that agency, to see that agency which is needed to, if you want to grow, if you want to develop, if you want to be a more effective leader, how are you going to change that? How are you going to develop that? What are you going to do? What are you going to choose to do? Because emotional intelligence, I mean, I know in my training, there are people that generally want to be there, and there are people that don't want to be there. They might call themselves growth-orientated individuals, but they're not really. They don't, they just want to get stuff done. Yeah, so I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I just
That's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just gonna double click on what do you mean. What they want to get stuff done? What do you mean by that?
Tasks, just get tasks done.
But based on their BAU, their business as usual, or you mean they don't want to be in there because they want to do their BAU?
Yeah,
Okay.
I know this because
So,
they've got their laptops open, their phones out, them all their mind somewhere else.
okay. Which is, yeah, definitely a scenario where no one is benefiting about that. Participants in the room, no one. They should maybe stay in front of their computer at home or in the office. Then they're gonna be more productive. Then, yeah. Okay. And okay, so so you see that sometimes people are incongruent with what they say. So maybe they will say, yes, we want to learn, but then when the learning opportunity is here, maybe they are not really learning. So that's incongruency and incongruent. Okay. And that's to go back to your agency. So that's to link it back. And now over to you.
Yeah. So if an agency is taking 100% responsibility, so if I take so this is the words of Stephen Covey or someone else, hang on, Jack Canfield, is someone that takes 100% responsibility for their life, don't make excuses, justifications, or play the blame game. And that is the piece that's needed, because if you then do emotional intelligence work, that's going to bring up stuff. It's going to bring up stuff in yourself. And that's going to bring up stuff in other people. You might not know how to respond to that. That's going to require you to engage with people in a completely different way. And that's going to produce maybe potentially uncomfortable emotions. And the ingredient that is missing before that, I believe it's personal agency. Because what tends to happen is we communicate in these new ways. We engage in these new behaviors, and then it produces a result, and then we're not comfortable with that, and we end up defaulting anyway. Whereas if you are someone that has complete agency and autonomy over your own reality, and you experience those uncomfortable emotions and you experience an uncomfortability, and you are truly someone that believes in their own and is truly committed to their own growth and understands that they are the ones that need to do that work. Right? I can do all the learning, but fundamentally, if I don't do the work, nothing's going to change. Then that's what's going to make the emotional intelligence work more effective. Because I believe that one of the things around the dynamics that we're seeing in organizational cultures is, now we've got leaders are saying, I'm going to make you feel engaged. I'm going to make sure that you're connected. I'm going to make sure that you're an effective leader. I'm going to make sure that you feel included. I'm going to make sure that you feel belonging. I'm going to make sure that you're a high-performing individual. I'm going to make sure that you have a very strong sense of well-being. And what we're actually taking away from people's agencies, because well-being, engagement, connection, high performance, it looks different for everyone. It doesn't look the same. And so that's why I'm a big, even emotional intelligence as well. So that's why I'm a big believer in actually what we need to be doing is cultivating people's agency first. Then we can teach all this other stuff and people can apply it in a way that feels empowering to them and that is also relevant for them as well.
Again, giving space. Just before, Dr. Caroline Hong really liked it. So yeah, so I guess we've been going for almost 1 hour. So that's great. And one last thing you want to leave us with?
One last thing. Have agency. Lean into inclusion and you'll develop the skill of anti-fragility, and that will hold all the other areas of your life in such a much more profound way.
Thank you, Winitha. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Bye, everyone.